Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am your host for this session. This is matching the numbers to the narrative. And tonight we are going to go through telling your story, the number story, as part of your proposals. So thank you for joining us, and we will get started. So this is part of the Tacoma Capacity Building Project, and the overall goal of this project is to support nonprofits within the city of Tacoma and also to support lesser resource groups, BIPOC-led groups, and cultural and arts organizations. This program is supported by the Tacoma's Neighborhood and Community Services team and also Tacoma Arts Tacoma Creates. So thank you for supporting this work. And we are going to go on to the next slide. All right, welcome and introductions. I am your host. I am Angela Silva, and I'm excited to share this presentation with you and help you match the numbers to the words. I am also excited about summertime and being able to bring you this learning evening session. So thank you for joining us. All right, so we are going to talk a little bit about getting started with the budget. With the budget, when you're preparing a grant proposal, it's really important to understand what you are going to need to do for the number part of this. So the budget is very important, and writing a good, strong grant proposal is also very important, but matching the words to the numbers or to the program that you're trying to do is super, super, super critical as well. So the funding announcement will tell you what type of budget you need to draft. As you roll out or design your program, you'll be able to hopefully jot down costs. So costs typically might include staff costs. So that could be an hourly rate of pay, salaries, taxes, benefits, cost to support your work. So whatever you're proposing, are you including costs for supplies, travel, outreach, marketing, consultants, partners, subcontractors, etc.? Make sure your costs reflect your programs. Programmatic costs, anything that we haven't covered that actually supports your program should be included. If there's indirect or administrative costs, please remember to put those in. And again, make sure your costs cover the project. So a key point in mind is you won't necessarily be more competitive if you don't include all the costs. The cost should reflect your project. Okay, we're going to go on to our next slide. So cost share or matching or in-kind services. So we're going to go back to that slide. Hold on. So cost share, matching, or in-kind services. So occasionally a funder may ask you or may provide partial funding for your program. We call that cost share, or they may require you to put in dollars to make up the budget for the project. So make sure that you review the announcement and you have the resources needed to cost share, whether they're looking for monetary cost share, so you need to have your own cash match for the project you're proposing, or maybe they need volunteer time, which we consider in-kind support. Make sure you can do that. We call these coupon programs. So if you can do it, great. If you don't or can't, maybe look for another funding opportunity that covers full budget for the program you're proposing. All right, we're going to transition to sample budget items. So budget items include, and it may vary depending on your project, but salaries and wages, fringe benefits. So those are important to include if you're paying anyone on the project. Rent, if maybe you have this office space or a space you're renting for the project. Utilities, phone, light, potentially internet. Office supplies, another key one that sometimes gets missed. Telephone, how are you going to get a hold of people and get the word out? We talked about internet already, so internet services is something you can budget. Transportation mileage if you're doing outreach. Accounting services, maybe you need some accounting support or other services. And legal attorney services, maybe you need some other specialized services. So this is not an exhaustive list, but just an example of budget items that you may need for your project. Okay, are going on to our next slide. All right, so we've got a couple of buckets of categories of costs here. We're going to talk about direct and indirect costs. So direct costs, these are costs that you need to support the project, and they can be directly allocated to the project. So for example, if you're doing outreach, we'd be looking for maybe staff to do that outreach. That would be a cost. And also maybe you're driving to go talk to people. We'd be looking for some mileage costs or maybe telephone costs or some printing costs or flyer costs. So outreach costs would be a direct cost to the program. Um, an indirect or overhead or administrative costs is not clearly allocated to a program. So it's not something you can clearly define, but these expenses can be support administrative costs or facilities costs. Sometimes these expenses are represented as a rate. A rate of costs, and that could be calculated at like 10%, or maybe you have an indirect cost rate. All right. Also, some categories for the budget would be direct costs. So things that you would want to keep in mind here would be direct budget categories. So salaries and wages, fringe benefits, professional services is another cost that's a direct cost category for a budget. Materials and supplies, travel. So maybe you're going to do some traveling, going to a conference, maybe a local mileage. Also, maybe foreign travel. You have to go overseas for a reason. So that could be a cost, a direct costs, and capital or non-capital equipment. So large equipment purchases over $5,000 could be a capital expense, or non-capital could be a smaller item. Sometimes a small computer might be considered a non-capital purchase in the funder's view. So these are some general direct budget categories. All right, we're going to transition to breaking down some of these costs, Kay, and we can kind of get to chat as we go through these. So feel free to ask questions if you'd like. Best practices for staff allocation. So we're talking about full-time equivalents, FTEs, when you're budgeting staff. And maybe funders will ask you to break this out. So if you see FTE or full-time equivalent language, usually a funder is talking about somebody that works 40 hours a week, which they consider full-time. Um, an employee can only be one employee can only be one full-time employee. So if you're budgeting a full-time employee on the project, that person is dedicated to that project. And you got to make sure that if this person is budgeted across many projects, it's still one person. So again, think of one person is a full-time FTE and can only be one person on a project or divided. Their effort could be divided. So be reasonable and realistic when you think of adding FTEs to a project. You need to make sure that if they're 100% dedicated to the project, they're only working on that project and nothing else if you're going to budget them. And sometimes folks may not budget a full-time person. They may budget like 32 hours a week so that person has room to do other things. So it's up to you how you'd like to budget, but just be cautioned that that person can only be one person and not 5 people. So other things that we like to make sure that folks include in their budgets is the wages. So whether that's an hourly rate or a salary, employer tax cost. So there should be the employer portion of the tax, which could be FICA, LNI, Washington taxes, paid family medical leave, etc. So this will be something that's budgeted as part of the fringe rate. So for every hour that you're budgeting of pay, there's going to be, fringe expenses, and taxes are included in part of that. You also might have like fringe benefit costs. So if you're providing like health or dental insurance or other benefits to your employees, employer paid benefits, these should be budgeted at a rate as well. So a percentage of their wages could be about 30% for those costs. And we would also include the taxes cost, what we consider into full fringe benefit rates. So we're going to see how these rates apply in some examples for budgeting, but just want to make sure that you're cognizant of not leaving any dollars on the table. So if you're budgeting staff time, there shouldn't be at least FICA and other costs associated with that for taxes. So their hourly rate plus the 10%. If you're adding medical benefits, there could be potentially more costs added to fringe depending on what that rate is for your organization. All right, we're going to transition out of the staff line and actually talk about professional services. So these could be consultants, marketing or website costs, accounting services, attorneys. Maybe you have other experts you need for your project. So professional services are something that could be part of your budget. When you're thinking of these, and we'll see this breakdown, make sure that you are thinking of a rate times an hour. There has to be a way that you've calculated these costs. That professional vendor will be able to break these down for you, and you can include it in your budget justification. All right, materials and supplies. So sometimes these costs are also budgeted depending on what you need for your project. These could be office supplies, pens, paper. We have paper clips here, folders, maybe ink or toner, some things that you need that are you use up every month to support your project. Postage, you might be doing some mailing, getting the word out. So postage is an allowable cost we see on projects. Again, phone services, maybe you're reaching out with cell phones or you have a desk line. Those are material and supplies costs, or maybe a small computer, iPad, tablets, those kind of things could be also considered project supplies depending on the funder of how they view them and can be included in your project budget. All right, we kind of segueing from some of these direct costs. What we see sometimes when you're going through the budgeting process in responding to a grant proposal, they may ask you what your operational budget is. So your operational budget is separate than the budget we've been talking about, which supports your project. This is the budget that you have for your organization that you set on an annual basis, and making sure that you're tracking revenues and expenses. And this budget may be an upload in some of the grants you're applying to. So make sure you distinguish what your operational budget is. Again, expenses, revenue expenses, so dollars coming in and dollars that you're paying for, so dollars going out to support the day-to-day needs of your organization over what we call a fiscal year, so over a 12-month period. If this is an upload, then you can just upload that in your proposal response. And we're going to dive in the next slides and break down that program and budget more. Okay, so another category of the program budget is the equipment budget. And so we're talking about capital equipment. Sometimes funders will specifically define how they view equipment. For this presentation, we're talking about a single item of $5,000 or more with a life of more than 1 year. Or it could be maybe multiple pieces of equipment. Maybe you're building a server for your project, right? You need the computer and a tower and lots of other components. So that can be a multiple pieces combined equal more than $5,000 with a useful life of more than 1 year. Be sure to check your funding announcement to see how they define computer equipment and capital equipment. Okay, non-capital equipment. So things that you may bring or need for the project that you need to budget. So usually these are maybe it could be tangible property, less than $5,000, not land or buildings. So maybe you have a series of office furniture, desks, other things that you have in your facility, maybe a refrigerator or something that could be tangible property. Software. So not purchased as part of with your hardware. Software could be a non-capital cost depending on how much it is. And you may or may not need to be this specific in your budget. We're just giving some examples. Printers, cameras, phones, again, filing cabinets, shade shelvings, cubicle walls, so that interior furniture for your building, blinds, carpeting, lockers. If you're buying this for a project, sometimes if you're kind of retrofitting a new space, you'll need to budget some of these for a new program. Some entities may consider certain things in this category list supplies, and they may categorize it as capital versus non-capital. So, and some funders may not be this specific. So check your funding announcement and really clearly outline the costs that you need for your project, and categorize them according to the guidelines there. All right, so going a little bit deeper dive into capital costs. Um, these are larger expenditures, things that, like I said, we talked about $5,000 or more with a tangible life of more than 1 year. So you might be able to budget capital expenditures in for your grant. The announcement will tell you if they're allowable or not. They'll fixed assets, could be land or buildings or large equipment purchases. Maybe you're getting a used van for outreach, things like that that are going to have a life of their own for a while to support your project and cost, over $5,000. So your organization should have a good policy on what those might be internally. The grant will define what you can charge to the grant in your budget. And a computer or laptop might be a capital cost depending on the cost of the computer system, or might be considered more of a smaller non-capital purchase or even a supply depending on the funder. So look at that and really define what you're purchasing and make sure that a capital request is allowable as part of the budget you're proposing. If we're looking at a specific example here for a computer or laptop, make sure that you have a few quotes for that system. If it is an expensive system over $5,000, that would be a capital purchase cost. And we want to make sure that it has a robust life past that 1 year for the unit cost. Again, the example of the server, if you have the server and it means multiple components and it's over several components equal the cost of $5,000, that could be considered a capital purchase. And you can make sure to outline that and define that accordingly in your budget. And also for capital purchases, these are something that need to be inventoried and tracked. So if you're budgeting and buying them with grant funds, make sure you're keeping track of them and keep them in good order for the life of the grant. All right, we're going to take a pause here for a moment, and we've got you all excited about budgeting different things, especially things that might be a little more expensive. We're going to talk about things maybe that you probably wouldn't include in a budget or that might get denied as you're putting your budget together. So advertising. Advertising may or may not be an approved cost. It depends on what you're doing. If you need to do outreach or marketing costs, that could be potentially allowable. So double check that. That's an iffy cost. Alcoholic beverages are something that's usually never approved for a grant. So those are paid for by people drinking them, but not by grant funds. Bad debt. So if you have some credit card debt that you haven't paid yet and want to budget that into the grant, that's not going to be a good idea. Entertainment. So there could be, camaraderie events that you want to budget with seem fine, but if you're trying to budget entertainment costs, that could be a little bit trickier. So make sure you kind of stray away from those, and ask the funder if you have something that you're not sure of to clarify if it's an allowable expense. Fines, interest, and penalties, nothing allowable there. I haven't seen anybody try to budget those, but if you are thinking to put those in a budget, not good. First class airfare. So economy airfare, yes. First class airfare, no. Fundraising, not allowable cost. That goes in the same vein as grant writing, not allowable cost, budget on a grant. Gifts, if you're giving out gifts to people because you like them, not allowable costs. Versus incentives. Maybe you have gift cards for people that you want to say thank you to. Those could be incentives, could be something that is a good thing to budget. Lobbying. So I don't see most folks putting lobbying costs in their budget, but if you are lobbying on an initiative, this would not be an allowable cost, or maybe supporting a lobbyist. Meals could be questionable. Why are you supporting food or meal costs? So make sure you have justification and approval. Office supplies could be questionable. We did talk about budgeting those, but making sure they're clearly justified and a funder wants to fund those types of costs. Personal, professional, and association memberships. So if there's a membership that you have every year, it may not be something that you can charge to the grant, but your organization can pay that for you. So some things to think about there. All right, so we are going to dive into a sample project. And Kay, just taking a pause here to see if you have any questions, or if I'm maybe going over things a little in too depth, or maybe not in depth enough. Okay, we will dive in. So a sample project. We're just going to talk about this project, and when we send out this recording, we'll also have some examples that you can work through. So this is a 12-month project. This pretend project is a 12-month project supporting outreach to clients in the city of Tacoma. You can put your favorite flavor of outreach in there, whatever outreach type you'd like. There are 5 staffs on this project. So we're going to talk about a project director, a program manager, a client outreach coordinator, a project educator, and a data analyst. And when you look at these staff positions, some of them are member full-time equivalent, so 100%, or some of them are part-time. So the 30 and 50% roles for the project director at 30% and the project educator at half-time. Other expenses you'll see that will break down are supplies, travel and consultants, and then we'll also talk about those indirect costs. How do they apply to this budget? Okay, so this is a snip of our wonderful template that we'll send out with this. We have the staff positions here. So Tom Smith, Dolly, Susie, Sandy, and Jackie are all part of this project. We have their commitment hours per week and their base salary. These are just pretend salaries. So again, you can customize these tools as needed, but we provided some examples here. And then salary requested here, as we can see right here. That's the salary they get depending on their commitment to the project. And then we have fringe rate and then the total project here. So the total calculations for this project, how many hours a week they're devoting and what they're doing for this project will be broken down on some of the next slides. Okay, so we wanted to kind of give you an example of these office supply costs. We're asking for about, if this is a 1-year project, about $100 a month for these costs. No equipment. We do have some travel. So 1 trip with 2 attendees, conference travel. We've got website consultant, translation, and we've got our contractual budget here, and then total costs for the project. Okay, so 200 and little over 200,000, 257,000 for everything. And we've got our indirect cost rate as well. So we will go into some other examples here. So we've got some narrative and we'll send this out along with the presentation, like how are Tom, Dolly, Susie, and Sandy spending their time. So this is just sample language that follows how much time they're spending on the project. And then the fringe rates and FICA, we talked about that early on, like we're estimating these in the project budget. In the sample justification here, we really highlighted supplies and travel, consulting funds, and indirect costs. And we really made this big here for travel costs. To when you're budgeting travel, you'll want to make sure that you have a total trip cost per person. We've got 2 people, 1 trip, 2 attendees, and it's $1,245 for each of those. And the cost per trip is outlined in conference registration, airfare, economy airfare, 1 night lodging, meal costs, and transportation. So just an example breakdown here for you. Hi, Kay. To make sure that you can outline that in detail. So travel costs are definitely something that you want to outline.